we drift softly into the world of the Vikings, a world shaped by cold northern seas, ancient myths, and a people whose stories continue to echo through time. As we settle in, allow your mind to gently imagine the misty shores of Scandinavia, where this chapter begins. The Vikings were more than warriors. They were explorers, farmers, traders, and dreamers. And as we move through their world, we'll uncover the truths behind their legends, slowly and peacefully. The Viking Age began around the late 8th century, a moment often connected to the raid on the monastery at Lindisfarne in 793 AD. This single event startled Europe, not because it was the first conflict of its kind, but because it carried a mystery. People wondered, who were these strangers arriving from the sea? The answer was not as simple as the stories would later suggest. These seafaring people came from what we now know as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. But they were never confined to these lands. Their minds and their ambitions stretched far beyond the coastlines they called home. Some were captivated by adventure, others sought wealth or fertile land, and many were simply curious about what lay beyond the horizon. To understand the Vikings, we must begin with their ships. These vessels were works of art and engineering, long, sleek, and light enough to glide across rivers. Viking longships allowed them to travel in ways no one else could. The ships became an extension of their identity, symbols of movement, ambition, and possibility. Imagine the gentle rhythm of waves against wooden hulls, the quiet determination of sailors who trusted the stars and the wind more than maps. These ships carried them not only across northern Europe, but all the way to distant lands like Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. Yes, long before Columbus was born, a Viking named Leif Erikson reached the shores of what is now Canada around the year 1000. His journey reminds us that history does not always unfold the way we're taught. Sometimes the quiet truth waits patiently beneath louder stories. But the Vikings were not solely explorers. Many were farmers who tended barley fields, raised livestock, and lived in long wooden houses that stretched warm and bright against the harsh Scandinavian winters. Their homes were places where families gathered around fires, shared stories, and passed traditions from one generation to the next. Viking society respected strength, yes, but not just the strength of warriors. They admired craftsmanship, intelligence, and loyalty. Women held more rights than in many other cultures of the time. They could own land, manage businesses, and seek divorce. Their voices mattered, and their presence shaped daily life. As we move deeper into their world, we discover that Viking culture was bound together by myth and meaning. Their gods, Thor, Odin, Freya, were forces of nature woven into their understanding of life itself. These were not distant beings, but companions on the journey. Thor was the protector, Odin, the seeker of wisdom, Freya, the embodiment of passion and beauty. Through these stories, the Vikings made sense of storms, seasons, victories, and loss. Yet one of the most surprising truths about them is also the simplest. Vikings cared deeply about appearance and hygiene. Archaeologists have found combs, razors, and grooming tools, showing that cleanliness was part of their identity. Far from the wild, messy image popular culture paints, many Vikings were known as well-groomed and even attractive to those they encountered. Still, perhaps the most persistent myth about Vikings is the horned helmet, a detail that never existed. No Viking helmet ever found has horns. The idea was invented spread north, quietly reshaping beliefs and customs. The Viking spirit evolved but never disappeared. Their language influenced English, their myths inspired art, and their journeys redrew the map of the world. Through time, something of them remains in our stories, our names, and perhaps in our imaginations. Whenever we think of distant seas and unknown horizons across time. But even here, in this place of swords and shields, we find something unexpected, a calm and thoughtful story beneath the noise. Take a gentle breath. Let your mind settle, like fog resting on a quiet fjord. When most people imagine Vikings, they picture chaos, warriors shouting, flames rising, villages falling. But reality was more complex. Warfare was not the center of Viking life. It was a tool used only when necessary and far more calculated than the legends suggest. A Viking warrior was not born wild. He was shaped by discipline, training, and responsibility. Strength without purpose meant nothing. Honor guided the sword more than anger ever could. The typical Viking weapon was the sword, often short, balanced, and beautifully made. Many swords were passed down for generations, each one holding memories of those who carried it. The blades were crafted through a method called pattern welding, creating rippling designs that looked like flowing water, a reminder that even instruments of war could hold beauty. Yet, swords were expensive. More common was the axe, not a barbaric tool, but a versatile instrument, used both in daily chores and, when needed, in battle. Some axes had long handles for reach, others short for quick strikes. Many were decorated because pride in craftsmanship was a quiet hallmark of Viking life. There were also spears, simple yet elegant, and shields painted in colors that may have symbolized family lines or personal values. The round shield, light and strong, was not just for defense. It was an extension of the warrior, a tool used to push, redirect, and create space. Combat was not chaotic. It was rhythmic, controlled, almost like a dance. Contrary to myth, Vikings did not wear horned helmets. Their helmets were plain, functional, and sometimes absent entirely. Horns would have been impractical, catching on ropes and weapons. The iconic image came centuries later from stage performances, not history. A Viking's true power was not in appearance, but presence. They moved with quiet confidence, prepared for whatever challenges the world placed before them. To them, bravery was not loud. It was calm. Large battles were rare. Most conflicts were small. Personal disputes, territorial disagreements, or carefully planned raids. These raids were not random acts of destruction. They were strategic responses to limited farmland, shifting economies, and opportunities across the sea. And even in moments of conflict, there were rules. The Vikings held deep respect for law. At the Thing, legal assemblies, disputes were settled without violence. Compensation, called wergild, was often paid to resolve disagreements peacefully. Violence was not a first choice. It was a last resort. Another forgotten truth: many Vikings fought not for conquest, but for employment. The Varangian Guard, elite warriors who served the Byzantine emperors, were famous not for savagery, but for loyalty, honor, and discipline. They protected rulers, stood guard in palaces, and became symbols of trust. Imagine that. The most feared warriors of Europe became the most trusted protectors of the East. Their relationship with fear was unique. While other cultures saw fear as weakness, Vikings saw it as natural, something to acknowledge, then decision to continue anyway. This mindset made them formidable, but it also made them adaptable. They observed new techniques, learned from other cultures, and improved themselves without pride getting in the way. Their strength was thoughtful, not mindless. As you listen, imagine a warrior standing on a cliff overlooking the sea. His weapons rest behind him. The wind brushes past his hair. He is not thinking about conquest. He is thinking about tomorrow, his family, his land, the next harvest, or the next voyage. His world was not violence. His world was possibility. The Viking warrior was a farmer when peace allowed, a trader when opportunity called, and a fighter when circumstance demanded. He was not defined by battle. He was defined by balance. Let that thought settle within you. Strength and softness are not opposites. They are companions. Just as a ship needs both a sturdy hull and flexible sails, a Viking life required resilience and humility. With that, our understanding deepens, and we gently step forward toward the next chapter. Because the Vikings were not only warriors, not only explorers, not only farmers, they were all of these things at once, which is why their presence lingers in history like the echo of an oar dipping into calm water. Let your breath settle. Feel your thoughts drift like mist across mountains and fjords. In this chapter, we step into the spiritual world of the Vikings, a place where gods walked among mortals, where the stars formed stories, and where fate was not feared but understood. To the Vikings, the universe was a vast, living tapestry. At its center stood Yggdrasil, the great world tree. Its branches stretched into realms both known and mysterious, connecting gods, humans, and creatures of myth. Every leaf, every root, carried meaning. This belief did not create fear. It created perspective. The Vikings saw themselves as part of something bigger, a story unfolding across time. At the heart of that story was Odin. Calm your mind and picture him, a wise wanderer, cloaked in secrets, with one eye that sees the physical world, and one eye sacrificed for wisdom. Odin was not a king in the way we imagine kings today. He was a seeker, forever pursuing knowledge, even when the cost was pain. To the Vikings, wisdom required sacrifice. Odin embodied this truth. Then there was Thor, protector of gods and humans, a symbol of strength, not anger. His hammer, Mjolnir, was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of order, safety, and the power to endure storms, both real and emotional. When thunder rolled across the northern sky, the Vikings believed it was Thor defending them once again. Thor wasn't feared. He was cherished, like a comforting whisper of reassurance in turbulent times. Freya, a goddess tied to love, beauty, and magic, showed another side of Viking belief. Softer, yet no less powerful. She taught that strength and vulnerability could coexist. To love deeply was not weakness. It was courage. There were others still. Loki, unpredictable and clever, reminding the Vikings that life never moves in straight lines. Tyr, god of justice and oaths. Njord, guide of sea and wind, beloved by sailors. Each god reflected an aspect of the human soul. They were not distant figures demanding blind loyalty. They were mirrors, emotional, flawed, and real. The stories they lived through, called myths, were never just fantasies. They were lessons carried through time. For example, Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, were thought to fly across the world each day, gathering knowledge. They represented thought and memory, teaching the Vikings that the mind was a valuable tool. The universe itself was divided into 9 realms. each with its own rhythm and purpose. Midgard was the world of humans. Asgard was the realm of the gods. Jotunheim used giants, not monsters, but forces of chaos that challenged order, just as hardship challenges every life. At the edge of everything waited Ragnarok, not the end, but a transformation, a moment when old things fell away and new possibilities emerged. The Vikings did not fear Ragnarok. They saw endings as beginnings in disguise. This philosophy gave them peace. If everything was temporary, then every moment mattered. Rituals and offerings were made not out of fear, but gratitude. A carved figurine placed near a hearth, a prayer whispered before a journey, a gesture, simple and sincere, meant to invite balance into daily life. Even runes, the letters of their alphabet, held meaning beyond communication. Each symbol carried its own power, associated with protection, fortune, or strength. Carving runes was an act of intention, yet conversation with fate. Their beliefs formed a calm and steady foundation. A Viking could face the unknown, a storm, a voyage, a new land, because the world was not random. It was a story with purpose, guided by forces that could be understood. As you listen, imagine the northern lights dancing across the night sky. Those shimmering colors were seen as reflections of Valkyries, spirits who watched battles, guided the worthy, and brought them to Valhalla, a hall of eternal companionship. Yet even Valhalla was misunderstood. It wasn't a place of endless fighting. It was a place of preparation, a metaphor for resilience, discipline, and the idea that life's challenges strengthen us for what comes next. The Viking soul was shaped by these beliefs. Calm in the face of uncertainty, open to possibility, and rooted in respect for forces greater than themselves. Take a slow breath, let it out gently, because with this understanding we begin to see why the Vikings were able to cross oceans, endure hardships, and leave a mark that still whispers through time. Their gods were not just characters, they were companions on the journey of existence. Close your eyes for a moment, if you wish. Picture a long wooden farmhouse nestled against rolling hills and thick forests. Smoke drifts gently from a thatched roof. The scent of pine, damp earth, and a hint of salt from the nearby sea hangs in the air. This is where most Vikings lived their lives. Despite their fierce reputation, the majority of Vikings were farmers. Their world revolved around the land, planting barley, oats, and rye, herding sheep and cattle, and preparing for winters that could be long and unforgiving. They understood the seasons intimately. Spring meant plowing fields. Summer was for tending livestock. Autumn was the season of harvest, and winter was a time of storytelling, rest, and preparation. Inside the longhouse, families gathered around a central hearth, the heart of the home. The fire gave warmth, light, and a place to cook. Walls were decorated with textiles and carvings, often showing patterns that reflected their beliefs. Children listened as elders shared tales of gods, giants, and distant places. These stories weren't merely entertainment. They were lessons about bravery, honor, and the fragile line between life and fate. Viking clothing was practical, but also carefully crafted. Men wore woolen tunics and trousers. Women wore dresses held with brooches that often displayed delicate metalwork. The cold northern air demanded layers, and the Vikings were masters of wool, spinning, weaving, and dyeing fabrics with plants that gave earthy, calming colors, soft blues, moss greens, Some pieces served as currency, others as status markers, and some as tokens of protection. These were not a show of vanity, they were expressions of identity. Now, listen closely, because here is something that surprises many. The Vikings valued cleanliness. They bathed regularly, often once a week, which was quite unusual for that period in history. They braided their hair, washed their faces, and trimmed their beards. Grooming wasn't merely practical, it was cultural. To face the world looking your best was a sign of strength and self-respect. Outside the home, the rhythm of Viking life extended into communities. Towns such as Burka, Hedeby, and Kaupang became centers of trade and craft. Markets buzzed with activity, traders haggling over furs, amber, pottery, and weapons. The air was filled with languages from distant lands, as travelers brought stories from far beyond the Scandinavian horizon. Social order was important, but not enforced through fear. Instead, the Vikings upheld something called the Thing, a gathering where free people met to settle disputes, make laws, and share decisions. Each voice, regardless of wealth, could be heard. It was one of the earliest forms of democratic assembly in Europe, whispered into existence long before parliaments and nation-states. While strength was respected, honor mattered more. A good name, a legacy, was priceless. Their poems, called sagas, preserved the deeds of families and warriors, so they would live on long after death. To be remembered was to achieve a kind of immortality. Religion guided their understanding of the world. To the Vikings, the universe was not rigid or simple. It was a great tree, Yggdrasil, whose branches stretched across realms filled with gods, humans, giants, and spirits. Every thunderstorm, every whisper of wind carried meaning. Loki's trickery, Thor's protection, Odin's endless search for knowledge, these were reflections of life itself, unpredictable, powerful, and full of mystery. Yet for all their beliefs in destiny, the Vikings also embraced choice. They believed that while fate determined the path, courage determined how one walked it. This quiet philosophy shaped their actions, whether farming, trading, or sailing toward unknown shores. As we leave this chapter, imagine the glow of the hearth fading, embers settling into silence. Outside, the northern sky shimmers with a veil of stars. Somewhere in the distance, the call of the sea reminds us that the Vikings were never still for long. Their world was rooted in the land, but their hearts always drifted toward the horizon. Settle your mind once more. Feel the gentle sway beneath you, the way a ship rocks softly on calm waves. For the Vikings, the sea was not a barrier. It was a road, a shimmering path into the unknown. Their ships were not just tools. They were expressions of ambition, freedom, and mastery over nature. The most iconic among these vessels was the Longship. Long, sleek, and astonishingly flexible, it sliced through water with a grace that astonished other cultures. Crafted from overlapping planks of oak, reinforced with iron rivets, these ships were both strong and surprisingly light. Each curve was intentional. Each detail served a purpose. Imagine standing beside one at dawn, the wood still damp with morning mist, carvings twisting like vines along the prow, and at the very front, a dragon-headed ornament staring into the horizon, silently promising both awe and fear. These dragon heads were not merely decoration. most people never learned to open. Historians believe the Vikings may have used a mysterious tool known as a sunstone, a type of crystal capable of detecting the sun's position even when hidden by thick northern clouds. With it, and with their knowledge of stars and tides, they navigated distances that baffled their neighbors. Their ships allowed them to explore everywhere the water led. Eastward, they followed rivers deep into the heart of what is now Russia, creating trade routes that connected Scandinavia to the Byzantine Empire. Southward, they approached the Mediterranean, encountering cultures rich in spices, silk, and stories. Westward, they crossed something far more dangerous, the open Atlantic, first Iceland, then Greenland, and finally, North America. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson landed on a place the sagas call Vineland, likely in modern-day Canada. The journey required immense courage, not because they believed monsters lived beyond the horizon, but because they knew the sea itself was unpredictable. A living thing with moods and tempers. To sail into it required a peaceful bravery, a calm acceptance of uncertainty. Longships weren't the only vessels the Vikings built. They were merchant ships called knars, wider and deeper, made for transporting goods, furs, timber, wool, and intricate metalwork. Every ship type reflected a different part of Viking life: exploration, trade, settlement, and sometimes warfare. But even Viking warfare requires gentle truth. Battles were not constant. Fighting was only one part of a broader lifestyle that revolved around opportunity. When a path was open, they took it. When the sea called, they answered. Life on board a Viking ship was simple, quiet, and demanding. Crews slept on deck, exposed to wind, rain, and stars. They ate dried fish and porridge. Their days were long and their tasks were repetitive. Rowing, steering, adjusting the sails, and keeping watch. Yet through this repetition came something meditative, almost spiritual, a sense of unity with the sea. Some Vikings said that the ocean was like a god, unpredictable yet deeply respected. Each journey was a conversation between sailor and wave, and each return home was a victory over nature itself. The ships did more than move people. They moved ideas. They carried news, beliefs, and languages across continents. Along the way, Viking travelers encountered different cultures, and instead of rejecting them, they absorbed what they found useful. They adapted, learned, and evolved. This adaptability, quiet and patient, is part of what made the Vikings so successful. They were not simply warriors. They were thinkers, observers, people who noticed patterns in the world and used them to carry their dreams across oceans. As this chapter comes to a close, allow yourself to imagine the sea at night, the moon reflecting off calm waters, the whisper of wind against the sail, the gentle creak of wood as the ship glides forward.